Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin.
The fluorescent lights in the paralegal office buzzed overhead as Rhett Kerrigan finished her last case review of the day. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, cross-referencing witness statements with police reports. 27 years old, and she'd learned to make herself indispensable in every job she held. The wall clock showed 8:47 p.m. Her shift at Murphy's Diner started at 5 a.m. tomorrow, which meant 4 hours of sleep if she was lucky. She grabbed her worn leather jacket from the back of her chair and locked her desk drawer with the same methodical care she applied to everything else. The drive home through Millbrook's quiet streets gave her time to think. Street lamps illuminated empty storefronts and faded, for lease signs. The town had been dying slowly since the textile plant closed 5 years ago, but people still clung to old routines and older grudges. She pulled into the driveway of the two-story house she'd grown up in, noticing 3 unfamiliar cars parked along the curb. Light spilled from every window, and she could hear laughter through the thin walls. Inside, the dining room table was set with their good china, the set her father had bought her mother for their 10th anniversary. Delaney sat at the head of the table, like she owned the place, gesturing wildly with a wine glass, while Maureen fussed over a group of women Rhett recognized from the country club. "Oh, Rhett." Maureen's voice carried that forced brightness she used when company was over. "Come say hello to everyone. We're celebrating Delaney's exciting news." Rhett set her keys on the kitchen counter and surveyed the scene. Empty wine bottles, expensive cheese platters, and her sister holding court like some small-town celebrity. "What's the occasion?" Delaney beamed, her blonde hair perfectly curled despite it being past 9 at night. "I'm opening a boutique, right downtown on Elm Street. Isn't that amazing?" The women at the table murmured their approval, but Rhett caught the quick glances they exchanged. Everyone in town knew Delaney's track record with money and commitment. "That's ambitious," Rhett said, pouring herself a glass of water from the tap. "Mrs. Henderson thinks it's exactly what downtown needs," Maureen chimed in, gesturing to a woman wearing too much jewelry. "Young, fresh energy. Someone with vision." Mrs. Henderson nodded enthusiastically. "The old Peterson building has such character. With the right renovations, it could be stunning." Rhett knew that building. She also knew it had been empty for 3 years because of foundation problems and a leaky roof. But she kept quiet, letting her sister enjoy her moment. The women left around 10, air-kissing Delaney and promising to shop at her boutique the moment it opened. Maureen walked them to the door, her voice carrying as she thanked them for coming. When the house finally fell quiet, Maureen returned to the dining room where Rhett was clearing plates. "Leave those," Maureen said. "I need to talk to you about something important." Rhett continued stacking dishes. "I'm listening." "Sit down, please." Something in her mother's tone made Rhett pause. She'd heard that careful, measured voice before, usually right before Maureen asked for something she knew Rhett wouldn't want to give. "The boutique is a real opportunity," Maureen began, settling into her chair. "Delaney has such wonderful taste, and she's done all the research. The location is perfect, and with the right inventory, she could really make something of herself." Rhett waited. There was always a "but" coming. "The thing is, the bank wants someone to co-sign the loan. Someone with stable income and good credit." Maureen's fingers drummed against the table. "You're the only one who qualifies." There it was. Rhett set down the plates and looked at her mother. "How much?" $75,000. "It sounds like a lot, but it's really an investment in the family's future." "In Delaney's future." "And if the business fails?" Maureen's face tightened. "Why would you even think that? Your sister has changed. She's focused now, responsible. This could be exactly what she needs to get her life on track." Rhett had heard variations of this conversation for years. Delaney needed help with rent, with car payments, with credit card debt. and somehow it always became Rhett's responsibility to provide that help. "I can't do it," Rhett said simply. "Can't or won't?" "Both." Maureen's composure cracked slightly. "She's your sister, Rhett. Family helps family. I help plenty. I pay rent to live in a house I partially inherited. I covered her car insurance for 6 months last year. I lent her money for Christmas presents that she never paid back." Rhett's voice stayed level, factual. "But I won't put my credit on the line for a business venture. This is different. This is her chance to build something real, with my name on the loan paperwork." Delaney appeared in the doorway, having changed into silk pajamas that probably cost more than Rhett made in a week. I heard raised voices. "Everything okay?" "Your sister doesn't want to help with the boutique," Maureen said, her disappointment obvious. Delaney's expression shifted from concern to irritation. "Seriously, Rhett? This is my dream we're talking about. Dreams don't require cosigners." "God, you're so cold sometimes. Do you know how hard it was for me to put together this business plan? To find the perfect location? To get people excited about supporting local business?" Rhett picked up the plates again. "I'm sure it was very challenging. Don't patronize me." Delaney's voice rose. "I've worked just as hard as you have. Just because I don't spend my life buried in legal paperwork doesn't mean I'm not capable of success. I never said you weren't capable. But you won't trust me with your precious credit score." "That's right." The bluntness of it seemed to catch Delaney off guard. She looked to Maureen for support, then back at Rhett. "You're unbelievable. After everything this family has been through, you'd sabotage my one chance at happiness because you're afraid of a little risk." "I'm not sabotaging anything. I'm protecting myself. From your own sister. From co-signing a loan I can't afford to pay back." Maureen stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Maybe that's the real problem here. Maybe you've gotten so used to taking care of only yourself that you've forgotten what family means." Rhett set the plates down carefully and turned to face her mother. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you can't support your family when we need you, then maybe you shouldn't be living here like you're entitled to our support." The words hung in the air between them. Rhett felt something cold settle in her chest, but her expression didn't change. "Are you asking me to leave?" Maureen lifted her chin. "I'm asking you to think about what kind of person you want to be. The kind who helps her sister succeed, or the kind who watches her fail from the sidelines. And if I choose the sidelines, then maybe the sidelines are where you belong." Delaney crossed her arms, watching the exchange with satisfaction. "She's made her choice, Mom. Let her live with it." Rhett nodded slowly. "I will." By midnight, Rhett had packed her belongings into 3 duffel bags and 4 cardboard boxes. 27 years of life reduced to what could fit in the back of her 10-year-old Honda Civic. She moved quietly through the house, taking only what was undeniably hers. From her bedroom, clothes, books, her laptop, the quilt her grandmother had made. From the bathroom, toiletries and the prescription bottles with her name on them. From the kitchen, the coffee mug her father had given her for her 16th birthday and a set of silverware she'd bought herself during college. She left behind photo albums, furniture, anything that could be argued over later. Clean breaks healed faster than messy ones. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Maureen and Delaney had gone to bed hours ago, probably assuming she'd change her mind by morning. They'd always counted on her practical nature to override her pride. They'd counted wrong as she carried the last box to her car. Delaney appeared at the top of the stairs in her silk pajamas. "Going somewhere." Rhett continued loading her trunk. "Moving out like you suggested." "I didn't suggest anything. Mom just wanted you to think about priorities." "I did. My priority is not owing anyone anything including family. Delaney came down the stairs, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. You don't have to be so dramatic about everything. We can work this out. There's nothing to work out. You need a co-signer. I won't be one. That's the end of it. So you're just going to abandon us? Leave Mom to deal with all the stress alone. Rhett closed the trunk and faced her sister. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm moving out of a house where I'm not welcome unless I'm useful. That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time either of you asked how I was doing, how work was going, whether I needed anything? Rhett's voice stayed quiet, but there was steel underneath. You only notice I exist when you need something from me. Delaney wrapped her arms around herself. You're being unfair. Am I? Name one conversation we've had in the past year that wasn't about your problems or your needs. Delaney opened her mouth, then closed it again. That's what I thought. Rhett pulled her car keys from her pocket. Good luck with the boutique. I hope it works out for you. Rhett, wait. Don't leave like this. We're family. You keep saying that like it means something. It does mean something. It means we stick together, even when things get hard. Rhett paused with her hand on the car door. No, Delaney. It means you stick to me when things get hard. When have you ever stuck by me? That's not fair. You never needed help the way I do. Everyone needs help sometimes. You just never bothered to notice when I did. She got in the car and started the engine. Through the windshield, she could see Delaney standing on the porch, arms crossed, watching her back out of the driveway. You'll come crawling back, Delaney called out as Rhett rolled down the window. You always do. Rhett shifted into drive and looked at her sister one last time. You've mistaken survival for submission. I won't make that mistake again. She drove away without looking back. The streets of Millbrook were empty except for a few cats prowling between parked cars. Rhett drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, letting muscle memory guide her through neighborhoods she'd known since childhood. Past the elementary school where she'd learned to read, the park where she'd had her first job mowing grass, the diner where she'd been serving coffee and scrambled eggs for 3 years. Her phone buzzed with a text message, but she didn't check it. Whatever Maureen or Delaney had to say could wait until tomorrow. She pulled into the parking lot of the 24-hour gas station on Route 9 and sat in her car, engine running. She had enough money saved for a security deposit on a small apartment, but most landlords wanted first and last month's rent up front. That would eat through her emergency fund, leaving her vulnerable if either of her jobs cut her hours. Her phone buzzed again. This time she looked. The text was from Nico Morales. Saw your car drive by. Everything okay? She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Need a place to crash for a night or two. Can pay. The response came immediately. Come over. No payment required. Nico lived in a converted garage behind his auto shop, and the space smelled like motor oil and coffee. He met her at the side door wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt, his dark hair sticking up like he'd been running his hands through it. What happened? He asked, helping her carry boxes inside. Family disagreement. Must have been some disagreement. Rhett set down a duffel bag and looked around the small space. One room with a kitchenette, a futon, and shelves lined with car parts and mechanical manuals. It was clean and organized, like everything else in Nico's life. They wanted me to co-sign a loan for Delaney's boutique idea. I said no. Maureen decided that meant I didn't deserve to live there anymore. Nico poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration. Delaney's opening a business. Trying to. $75,000 loan for a boutique in the Peterson building. The one with the leaky roof. That's the one. Nico handed her a mug and sat down on the futon. And they expected you to guarantee the loan. I'm the only one with decent credit. Rhett sank into the single chair, suddenly exhausted. According to Maureen, that makes it my responsibility to help families succeed. What's your gut telling you about the business plan? That it's another one of Delaney's schemes to avoid dealing with real problems. She's never held a job for more than 6 months, and she thinks running a boutique is going to be her salvation. But you could be wrong. Rhett met his eyes. I could be, but I won't bet my financial future on it. Nico nodded slowly. Can't say I blame you. I've seen what happens when family mixes with money. Usually doesn't end well for anyone. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee that could strip paint. Rhett had known Nico since middle school, back when he was the skinny kid who got picked on for reading car magazines during lunch. He'd dated Delaney briefly in high school, but that had ended when she decided he wasn't ambitious enough for her social aspirations. You can stay here as long as you need, he said finally, but I've got a feeling you won't want to stay long. Why is that? Because you're not the type to depend on anyone else's charity, even when it's freely given. He was right, and they both knew it. Rhett had been taking care of herself since she was 16, when her father's death had turned Maureen bitter and Delaney helpless. She wasn't about to start leaning on people now. I'll find my own place by the end of the week. I know you will. As she settled onto the futon with a borrowed pillow and blanket, Rhett heard footsteps in the gravel outside. A car door slammed, followed by the sound of someone walking around the building. Nico appeared at the window, peering through the blinds. Miss Betty's out there. Looks like she wants to talk. Bet Ryland was 73 years old and had been practicing family law in Millbrook for 40 years before she retired. She owned half the rental properties in town and had a reputation for being harder to crack than a government safe. Nico opened the door, and Miss Bet walked in without invitation. She wore a wool coat over flannel pajamas and bedroom slippers that had seen better decades. Heard you had some excitement tonight, she said, looking directly at Rhett. News travels fast. In a town this size, everything travels fast, especially when it involves the Kerrigans. Miss Bet settled into the chair Rhett had vacated, her sharp eyes taking in the packed boxes and duffel bags. I've got a guest house behind my place. 1 bedroom, full kitchen, separate entrance. Rent's $300 a month, utilities included. You interested? Rhett blinked. Why are you offering? Because I've been watching your family for years, and I know the difference between smart money management and cold-hearted selfishness. What you did tonight was smart. I don't need charity. Good thing I'm not offering any. I'm offering a rental agreement at fair market value. You pay on time. Keep the place clean. Don't bring home strange men, and we'll get along fine. Rhett looked at Nico, who shrugged. Miss Bet doesn't make offers lightly. I'll need first month's rent and a security deposit, Miss Bet continued. You can move in tomorrow if you want. Place has been empty for 6 months, but it's clean and furnished. $300 a month was less than what Rhett had been paying Maureen for the privilege of living in her childhood bedroom. The offer was too good, which meant there had to be a catch. What's the real reason? Rhett asked. Miss Betty's weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile. Maybe I believe in supporting people who know how to say no when it matters. The guest house behind Miss Betty's Victorian was small but functional, with white painted walls and hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places. Rhett spent Saturday morning unpacking her belongings and Sunday afternoon researching rental agreements and tenant rights. By Monday morning, she felt settled enough to think clearly about what came next. Her first priority was making sure her family's financial drama couldn't touch her. That meant understanding exactly what Delaney was walking into with this boutique venture. During her lunch break at the paralegal office, Rhett pulled up the public records database she used for case research. A few searches revealed Delaney's credit history, loan applications, and court filings, all of which painted a picture of financial chaos stretching back 5 years. The data told a story Rhett recognized but had never seen laid out so clearly. 3 defaulted credit cards, 2 failed payment plans, and a small claims judgment from a landlord in Kansas City. Most interesting was a business loan application from 18 months ago, a $20,000 request for something called D&M Catering Solutions that had defaulted after 4 months. Rhett had never heard of D&M Catering. As far as she knew, Delaney had been unemployed 18 months ago, living at home and claiming she was finding herself. A deeper search revealed that Maureen had quietly paid off the defaulted catering loan to avoid damage to her own credit score. The payoff had come from the sale of their father's life insurance policy money that was supposed to be set aside for unexpected expenses. Rhett printed the documents and locked them in her desk drawer. Then she started researching the Peterson building and the permits required for retail businesses in downtown Millbrook. The building inspection reports made for interesting reading. Water damage, electrical problems, and structural issues that would require significant investment to fix. The estimated renovation costs started at $40,000 and went up from there, but the real surprise was in the permit applications. According to city records, someone had fast-tracked a special use permit for the Peterson building, bypassing the usual 6-month review process. The permit had been approved by Councilman Hollis Dent, whose signature appeared on 3 different forms dated within a 2-week period. Rhett knew Hollis Dent, by reputation a local insurance agent who'd been on the city council for 8 years and had a talent for making favorable deals happen for the right people. She also knew, thanks to her work in legal research, that his brother-in-law owned the Peterson building. The pieces fit together in an ugly pattern. Delaney's loan application listed inflated income figures and failed to mention her previous default. The permit process had been rushed through by someone with a financial interest in getting the building occupied. And Maureen was prepared to risk the family's financial stability to support a plan built on lies. Rhett leaned back in her office chair and stared at the documents spread across her desk. Her family had always accused her of being cold and calculating, of putting money ahead of relationships. They'd never understood that she'd learned those skills by watching them make the same financial mistakes over and over again. Now they were about to make the biggest mistake yet, and they expected her to pay for it. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for Jennifer Walsh, a loan officer at First National Bank who'd processed several of Rhett's client payment plans. "Jennifer, it's Rhett Kerrigan. I've got a question about loan applications and fraud prevention." "Sure, what do you need?" If someone knowingly provided false information on a loan application, what would trigger a review of their file? Anonymous tips, mostly. Or if we discover discrepancies during the standard verification process. "Why? Is this related to a case you're working on?" Something like that. What kind of documentation would be most helpful in a situation like that? Previous loan defaults, inflated income claims, anything that shows a pattern of financial misrepresentation. We take fraud pretty seriously, especially with small business loans. Good to know. Thanks, Jennifer. Anytime. Hey, wasn't your sister in here last week asking about a business loan? Rhett's grip tightened on the phone. Was she? Yeah, for some kind of boutique. Nice girl, but her paperwork seemed a little optimistic, if you know what I mean. I can imagine. After ending the call, Rhett sat quietly at her desk for 10 minutes, thinking through her options. She could walk away, let Delaney and Maureen deal with the consequences of their choices. She could try to warn them, though they'd probably accuse her of sabotage. Or she could take a more direct approach. The anonymous tip line for First National was printed on the bottom of every loan application. All it would take was a phone call and some carefully selected documentation. Rhett picked up the phone, then set it down again. Then picked it up again. Her family had made their choice. They'd chosen Delaney's dreams over Rhett's stability, chosen image over honesty, chosen to force Rhett out rather than respect her decision. If they wanted to play family politics, she'd give them conditions they'd never forget. She dialed the number. Wednesday morning brought rain and the news that Delaney's loan application was being held for additional review. Rhett heard about it from Nico, who'd heard it from his customer, Mrs. Peterson, who'd heard it from her nephew, who worked at the bank. Apparently, they need more documentation, Nico said, handing Rhett a cup of coffee at Murphy's diner during her break. Something about verifying income claims. That's unfortunate, Rhett replied, refilling the sugar dispenser with practiced efficiency. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? She met his eyes steadily. I know that loan officers are required to verify the accuracy of applications before approving large amounts. Rhett, I know that small business loans have a high default rate, especially when the applicant has a history of financial problems. What did you do? I made a phone call, provided some public records, helped a bank avoid a risky investment. Nico rubbed his forehead. Jesus, Rhett, they're going to know it was you. They're going to suspect it was me. They can't prove anything. Does that matter? Your mother's already furious about you moving out. If she finds out you sabotaged Delaney's loan, she'll what? Kick me out of the house again. The rain drummed against the diner windows while Nico processed this. Around them, the lunch crowd worked through plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, their conversations mixing with the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the coffee machine. This isn't like you, he said finally. Maybe it is like me. Maybe you just never saw it before. The Rhett I know doesn't play games. She handles problems directly. I handled this directly. I gave a bank the information they needed to make an informed decision. Nico shook his head. You're playing with fire. No, I'm playing with facts. There's a difference. That afternoon, Rhett volunteered to help with setup for the annual charity gala at the Millbrook Community Center. The event raised money for the local food pantry and always drew a crowd of business owners and city officials looking to be seen supporting worthy causes. She spotted Elliot Hartman across the room, directing the placement of silent auction tables. Delaney's fiancé was 28, clean-cut, and came from the kind of family that had been donating money to worthy causes for 3 generations. His family owned Hartman Construction, and according to local gossip, they were being very generous with funding for Delaney's boutique dreams. Rhett had always found Elliot pleasant, but naive, the kind of man who believed people were fundamentally good because he'd never had reason to think otherwise. Tonight, she planned to give him some reasons. Rhett, I didn't expect to see you here. Elliot's smile was genuine, unmarked by the tension that had defined every family interaction lately. I try to volunteer when I can. The food pantry does important work. Absolutely. Delaney and I were just talking about ways we could support local charities once the boutique gets established. She's so passionate about giving back to the community. That's wonderful. How are the business plans coming along? Elliot's expression shifted slightly. Well, we've hit a small snag with the loan process. The bank wants some additional documentation, but our attorney says it's just standard procedure for larger amounts. These things can be complicated. There's always so much paperwork involved in small business loans. Exactly. Between income verification and credit checks and all the permit requirements. It's like they want to know your entire life history. Rhett busied herself arranging auction bid sheets. I imagine they're especially careful about verifying income claims. Banks have gotten stricter about that since the recession. Right, that makes sense. Although Delaney's income projections are pretty conservative, so there shouldn't be any issues there. Income projections are different from current income, though. I assume they want to see tax returns and employment records. Elliot paused in his work. I think so. Why? Is there something I should be concerned about? This was the moment. Rhett could back off, make some generic comment about banking procedures, and let Elliot discover Delaney's financial history on his own time. Or she could plant the seed that would grow into doubt. I'm sure everything's fine, she said carefully. It's just that banks tend to look at patterns of financial behavior, not just current circumstances. If someone had previous loan defaults or credit problems, that would definitely complicate the approval process. Defaults. Elliot's voice sharpened slightly. What kind of defaults? Oh, I don't know anything specific about Delaney's situation. I just meant in general, from my work in legal admin. I see a lot of loan applications that get denied because of previous defaults or bankruptcy filings. She pulled a manila folder from her bag, one of several client files she'd brought to review during quiet moments at the gala. As she opened it, a single sheet of paper slipped out and fluttered to the floor. Oops. She bent to retrieve it, but Elliot was faster. He picked up the paper and glanced at it before handing it back. In that brief moment, his eyes took in the header, D&M Catering Solutions, Loan Default Notice. Thanks, Rhett said, tucking the paper back into her folder like it was just another work document. But she'd seen recognition flash across Elliot's face. He'd seen the name Delaney Kerrigan on that paper, even if he didn't understand the context yet. Is that related to a case you're working on? He asked. Client confidentiality, Rhett replied with an apologetic shrug. I can't really discuss specific files. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Rhett helped serve dinner and clean up afterwards, making small talk with other volunteers and staying visible throughout the event. If anyone asked later, a dozen people would confirm she'd spent the evening focused on charity work, not family drama. But she noticed Elliot checking his phone more frequently as the night went on, and by the time people started leaving, his friendly demeanor had developed a thoughtful edge. Seeds planted. Now she had to wait for them to grow. The call came from Miss Bet on Friday morning, just as Rhett was getting ready for her shift at the diner. You need to come over here, the older woman said without preamble. Now. Rhett found Miss Bet in her kitchen, surrounded by manila folders and legal documents that covered every available surface. The former attorney had traded her usual flannel shirt for a navy blazer, and her white hair was pulled back in the same severe bun she'd worn to court for 4 decades. Sit down, Miss Bet said, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. We need to talk about your family's business venture. What about it? Don't play dumb with me, girl. I know you've been digging into permits and loan applications. The question is, what are you planning to do with what you've found? Rhett accepted the coffee and sat down at the cluttered table. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, I've been practicing law in this town since before you were born, and I recognize the smell of corruption when it crosses my desk. Hollis Dent's been running his little permit approval scheme for years, but he's gotten sloppy. The Peterson building deal is going to bite him eventually. How do you know about that? Because I still have friends at City Hall, and they're concerned about the pattern of fast-tracked approvals for buildings owned by Dent's relatives. Miss Bet pulled a folder from the pile and opened it. 3 questionable permits in the past 2 years, all for properties that needed major renovations to meet safety codes. Rhett studied the documents Miss Bet spread across the table. Permit applications, inspection reports, and approval notices that painted a clear picture of official misconduct. Why are you showing me this? Because corruption thrives in darkness, and you're in a position to shine some light on it. I'm a paralegal, not an investigative journalist. No, but you know how to research and document evidence, and you have personal motivation to see that this particular deal gets the scrutiny it deserves. Miss Bet was right, and they both knew it. The Peterson building permit was the keystone of Delaney's business plan. Without it, the boutique couldn't open, and the loan couldn't be justified. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that the public has a right to know when their elected officials prioritize personal relationships over proper procedure. Miss Bet pulled out another folder. I'm also suggesting that Jessa Linford would be very interested in a story that could revitalize her journalism career. Rhett knew Jessa by reputation, a former newspaper reporter who'd moved to Millbrook 2 years ago and had been struggling to find meaningful work in local media. She freelanced for regional papers and had a blog that nobody read, but she was known for thorough research and aggressive fact-checking. You want me to leak this to a reporter? I want you to provide information that serves the public interest. What Jessa does with that information is her professional decision. The distinction felt thin, but Rhett understood the logic. Hollis Dent's permit scheme was a legitimate public concern, regardless of her personal motivations for exposing it. How do I make contact without it tracing back to me? Anonymous email account, public library computer, envelope with no return address. There are ways if you're careful. Miss Bet was offering her the tools for revenge, but she was also offering something else, the chance to stop genuine misconduct that affected the entire community. Why are you helping me with this? Because I spent 40 years watching good people get screwed by systems that protected the wrong priorities. I'm too old to practice law anymore, but I'm not too old to share what I know with someone who might use it wisely. That afternoon, Rhett drove to the public library in the next town over and created an anonymous email account using their computer system. She scanned Miss Betty's documents and wrote a carefully worded message to Jessa Linford. Ms. Linford, I believe you would be interested in examining permit approval processes for downtown Millbrook properties. The attached documents show questionable patterns and approvals for buildings requiring significant safety improvements. Councilman Hollis Dent's family connections to these properties may warrant investigation. She sent the email and drove home, feeling the weight of another line crossed point 2 days later. Jessa's story appeared online under the headline, Councilman Fast-Tracks Permit for Business Tied to Family Conflict of Interest? The article laid out the permit timeline, the family connections, and the safety issues with clinical precision. WY Tuesday, everyone in Millbrook was talking about it. By Wednesday, Councilman Dent had called for a public hearing to address the allegations. And by Thursday, the Peterson building permit was suspended pending further review, which meant Delaney's boutique plan had just collapsed. Rhett heard the news from 3 different customers during her morning shift at Murphy's Diner, each one eager to share the latest gossip about the Kerrigan family's troubles. Such a shame, said Mrs. Martinez, stirring sugar into her coffee. That girl had such high hopes for her little store. Maybe it's for the best, replied Mr. Foster from the next booth. That building's been a money pit for years. Anyone who wanted to open a business, there should have done their homework first. Rhett refilled their coffee cups and said nothing, but she felt the satisfaction of watching carefully laid plans come together. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at the park after your shift. Delaney Millbrook Park consisted of 12 acres of grass, playground equipment, and walking trails that nobody used after dark. Rhett found Delaney sitting on a bench near the old bandstand, still dressed in the designer clothes that were supposed to project success and confidence. You came, Delaney said without looking up. You asked me to. I wasn't sure you would, given how things ended. Rhett sat down on the opposite end of the bench, leaving space between them. What do you want, Delaney? I want to apologize for what happened the other night, for the things I said. Mom and I were stressed about the loan, and we took it out on you. The apology sounded practiced, like something Delaney had rehearsed in front of a mirror. But there were tears in her eyes, and her voice carried genuine desperation. I accept your apology. Do you? Because I keep thinking about what you said, about how we only talk to you when we need something. And I realized you were right. Rhett waited. Experience had taught her that Delaney's moments of self-awareness were usually prologues to larger requests. The thing is, everything's falling apart now. The permit got suspended because of that stupid newspaper article, and the bank is asking for more documentation. And Elliot keeps asking questions about my financial history that I don't know how to answer. What kind of questions? About previous loans, about income verification, about whether I've ever had credit problems. Delaney wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I think someone told him about the catering business. What catering business? Don't pretend you don't know. The one that failed last year. The one Mom had to bail me out of. So Elliot had done his research. The lost document at the charity gala had accomplished exactly what Rhett had hoped it would. Why didn't you tell him about it up front? Because I was embarrassed. Because I wanted him to see me as successful and capable, not as someone who screws up everything she touches. Delaney's honesty was unexpected, and for a moment Rhett felt something that might have been sympathy. But sympathy wouldn't change the fundamental pattern of their relationship. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Help. Real help, not just money. You're good at this stuff, paperwork, legal research, making sense of complicated systems. Maybe you could help me put together a new business plan that addresses all these concerns. And in return, you can come home. Mom misses you, even if she won't admit it. And I miss having a sister who actually cares about what happens to me." The offer was tempting in its way. Rhett missed the familiarity of the house she'd grown up in, and there was a part of her that wanted to believe Delaney's apology was genuine, but she'd learned to distrust her own impulses toward forgiveness. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Really? I'll think about it." 2 days later, Rhett showed up at the house she'd grown up in, carrying a briefcase and wearing the navy suit she kept for court appearances. Maureen opened the door with a mixture of surprise and relief. "Rhett, I'm so glad you came. Delaney said you needed help with paperwork." "We do. Come in, please." The house felt smaller than Rhett remembered, or maybe she'd just gotten used to the space and silence of Miss Betty's guest house. Delaney was waiting in the dining room with folders spread across the table and her laptop open to a half-finished loan application. "Thank you for coming," Delaney said. "I know this is awkward, but I really do need your help." For the next 3 hours, Rhett reviewed loan documents, permit applications, and business plans with the methodical attention she'd learned in paralegal training. She identified problems, suggested corrections, and helped Delaney draft responses to the bank's questions. She also memorized passwords, noted file locations, and made mental copies of information that might prove useful later. "This is really helpful," Delaney said as they worked. "I had no idea there were so many details to keep track of. Business loans are complicated. Banks want to make sure they're making safe investments. I guess that makes sense. I just never thought about all the background checking they do." While Delaney went to the kitchen to make coffee, Rhett quickly accessed the shared laptop they'd been using and copied several folders to a flash drive. Tax returns, bank statements, and correspondence with city officials, everything she needed to build a comprehensive picture of her family's financial situation. "How's it going in here?" Maureen asked, returning with a fresh pot of coffee. "We're making good progress," Rhett replied, slipping the flash drive into her briefcase. "Delaney's business plan has potential, but there are some gaps that need to be addressed." "What kind of gaps?" "Income verification, mostly. The bank wants to see consistent earnings over the past 2 years, and Delaney's employment history is somewhat irregular." Maureen and Delaney exchanged glances. "What if we supplemented her income with family contributions?" Maureen asked. "I could provide documentation showing regular financial support. That might help, but it doesn't address the underlying creditworthiness concerns. Previous loan defaults create red flags that are difficult to overcome." "But the catering thing was different," Delaney protested. "I had a business partner who mismanaged the finances. It wasn't entirely my fault." Rhett made note of the lie. She'd researched D&M catering thoroughly, and Delaney had been the sole proprietor but kept her expression neutral. "The bank won't see it that way. They'll see a pattern of business failures and conclude you're a high-risk investment. So what are our options?" Maureen asked. "Honestly, find a different building with lower renovation costs and simpler permitting requirements. Scale back the business plan to something more manageable, or find private investors willing to take risks that banks won't." "We can't just give up," Delaney said. "This boutique is my chance to prove I can be successful." "Success isn't about proving anything to other people. It's about building something sustainable that serves real needs. The conversation continued for another hour, with Rhett providing guidance that was technically helpful but practically discouraging. By the time she left, Delaney looked overwhelmed and Maureen looked worried. "Will you help us draft an appeal letter to the bank?" Delaney asked as Rhett packed her briefcase. "Of course. I'll put something together and email it to you by Friday." "Thank you. And Rhett, I meant what I said about wanting you to come home. This family works better when we're all together." Rhett nodded and left without committing to anything specific. She had what she needed now: complete financial records and clear evidence of ongoing deception. The appeal letter she sent on Friday was professional and well written, but it included several subtle discrepancies that would trigger additional scrutiny. She also made sure to include references to income sources that couldn't be verified and business projections that seemed unrealistic for someone with Delaney's track record. By the following Monday, the bank had scheduled a face-to-face meeting with Delaney to clarify some concerns about her application. The trap was set. Now, Rhett just had to wait for the inevitable collapse. The first domino fell on a Wednesday morning in late October. Rhett was processing client intake forms when Jennifer Walsh called from First National Bank. "Thought you might want to know," Jennifer said, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone sharing information that wasn't technically confidential, but wasn't exactly public either. "That loan application your sister submitted? It's been officially denied." "On what grounds?" "Fraudulent misrepresentation of income, failure to disclose previous loan defaults, and questions about the viability of the proposed business location." The review committee wasn't comfortable with the risk profile. Rhett made appropriate sounds of concern while privately feeling a surge of satisfaction. "That's unfortunate. I know she was counting on that funding. Between you and me, she would have been better off being honest from the start." The discrepancies in her documentation raised red flags that might have been overlooked with a more straightforward application. What kind of discrepancies? Inflated income figures, mostly. She claimed earnings from sources that didn't show up in her tax records. And then there was the issue with the business partner. She listed someone named Elliot Hartman as a 50% partner and guarantor. But when we contacted him directly, he said he'd never agreed to any formal business partnership. Seemed genuinely surprised by the whole thing. Rhett absorbed this information with growing understanding. Delaney had been using Elliot's name and credit without his knowledge, assuming she could smooth over the details later. It was exactly the kind of shortcut that had defined her financial decision-making for years. I imagine that created some complications. That's putting it mildly. Mr. Hartman was quite upset when he learned his name was on loan documents he'd never seen. He's actually asked us to flag his credit report for unauthorized activity. After ending the call, Rhett sat quietly at her desk for several minutes. She'd expected Delaney's loan to be denied based on the documentation she'd provided, but she hadn't anticipated the fraud angle. That elevated the situation from simple business failure to potential criminal activity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nico. "Heard about the loan. You okay?" She typed back, "I'm fine. Working. Delaney's been calling around town, looking for you. Seems upset." "I'm sure she is." The next text took longer to arrive. Rhett. "Whatever you did, I hope you know what you're doing." She didn't respond to that one, but the second domino fell that afternoon. Rhett learned about it from Mrs. Chun at the grocery store, who'd heard it from her daughter, who worked at Hartman Construction. "Such a shame about that engagement," Mrs. Chun said while Rhett bagged her groceries. "That Hartman boy seemed so devoted to Delaney. But I suppose when trust is broken, it's hard to repair." They broke up. This morning, apparently. Something about business dealings and dishonesty. My daughter said Elliot's father was furious about legal liability issues. The Hartman family had been building their reputation in Millbrook for 3 generations. They couldn't afford to be associated with loan fraud or permit violations, even tangentially. Elliot's decision to end his engagement was probably as much about protecting his family's business interests as it was about personal betrayal, which meant Delaney had lost her fiancé, her funding, and her social standing in the span of 24 hours. The third domino toppled on Thursday. Miss Bet appeared at the diner during Rhett's afternoon shift, carrying a manila envelope and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd just witnessed justice served. "Thought you might be interested in today's mail," she said, settling into a corner booth and ordering coffee. Rhett glanced around the half-empty diner, then joined Miss Bet for her break. The envelope contained official correspondence from the Millbrook City Tax Assessor's office, addressed to Maureen Kerrigan. "How did you get this?" "It was delivered to my address by mistake. Easy error to make your living in my guest house now, after all." The letter was a formal notice regarding unpaid business taxes and penalties related to D&M Catering Solutions. According to the document, someone had used Maureen's social security number when registering the failed business, making her liable for outstanding tax obligations totaling $8,000. Delaney used her mother's identity for the catering business. Looks that way. And now the state wants their money with interest and penalties. Rhett studied the tax notice, her legal training helping her understand the implications. Maureen could contest the liability, but she'd need to provide documentation proving she wasn't involved in the business operations. That would require revealing Delaney's identity fraud, which could trigger criminal charges. This is serious. Very serious. Identity theft, tax fraud, business misrepresentation. Your sister has been busy. Miss Betty's tone was conversational, but her eyes were sharp with approval. She'd helped orchestrate this exposure, and she was pleased with the results. "What happens now?" "That depends on how your mother chooses to handle it. She can pay the money and protect Delaney from criminal charges, or she can fight the liability and throw her daughter to the wolves." Either way, the Kerrigan family's financial stability was about to take another major hit. The final domino fell on Friday morning, when Jessa Linford's follow-up story appeared online. Local family's business venture involved loan fraud and tax violations. The article was devastating in its thoroughness. Jessa had traced the connections between Delaney's failed catering business, her fraudulent loan application, and the suspended permit for the Peterson building. She'd interviewed bank officials, city council members, and former business associates who painted a picture of systematic dishonesty. Most damaging was a quote from Elliot Hartman. "I was shocked to discover that my name had been used on financial documents without my knowledge or consent. This kind of deception has no place in legitimate business relationships." The story spread through social media with the speed that only small-town scandals could achieve. By noon, everyone in Millbrook knew that the Kerrigan family's boutique dream had been built on lies, and that Delaney's pattern of financial deception stretched back years. Rhett read the article during her lunch break, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't regret either. She'd set events in motion, but Delaney had provided all the ammunition. Every fraudulent document, every inflated claim, every deceptive practice had been Delaney's choice. Her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to Maureen's tearful message. "Rhett, please call me back. We need to talk. Everything is falling apart, and I don't know what to do. Please." She deleted the message without returning the call. Saturday evening brought the reckoning Rhett had been expecting. She was reading case files in Miss Betty's guest house when headlights swept across her windows, followed by the sound of car doors slamming and heated voices. Through the front window, she watched Maureen and Delaney march up the gravel driveway, their faces set with determination and fury. Maureen wore the black coat she reserved for funerals and formal occasions, while Delaney had chosen designer jeans and a cashmere sweater armor disguised as casual wear. Rhett opened the door before they could knock. "We need to talk," Maureen said without preamble. "Come in." They entered the small living room like invading forces, taking in the modest furnishings and sparse decorations with barely concealed disdain. Delaney sat on the edge of the sofa, while Maureen remained standing, her posture rigid with controlled anger. "Do you know what you've done?" Maureen asked. "I've made some phone calls and shared some public information. What people chose to do with that information was their decision." "Don't play games with us," Delaney snapped. "You destroyed my business before it even started. You sabotaged my loan. You ruined my engagement. You humiliated our entire family." Rhett settled into the chair across from them, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "I didn't sabotage anything. I provided factual information to people who needed to make informed decisions. You provided private information to damage us deliberately. I provided accurate information about public records and financial history. If that information was damaging, it's because the underlying actions were problematic." Maureen stepped forward, her voice shaking with emotion. "How could you do this to your own family? After everything we've been through, after all the support we've given you over the years." "What support?" Rhett's tone remained level. "The support that required me to pay rent to live in a house I inherited? The support that expected me to co-sign loans I couldn't afford? The support that kicked me out when I refused to enable financially irresponsible decisions? We gave you a home. You gave me a bedroom in exchange for monthly payments and the expectation that I'd solve everyone else's problems." Delaney stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "You're unbelievable. Do you have any idea what this has cost me? Elliot won't even take my calls. The bank has blacklisted me from future loans. Everyone in town is talking about what a fraud I am. Are you a fraud?" The question hung in the air between them. "That's not the point," Delaney said finally. "That's exactly the point. You lied on loan applications. You used Elliot's name without his permission. You used Mom's social security number for a business she knew nothing about. You inflated income figures and hid previous defaults. Those aren't accidents or misunderstandings. They're deliberate deceptions. I was trying to make something of myself. I was trying to build a legitimate business and contribute to this family for once. By lying to everyone involved. By doing whatever it took to get the funding I needed. Rich people do it all the time. They exaggerate and manipulate and find ways around the rules. I was just trying to level the playing field." Rhett studied her sister's face, seeing genuine confusion mixed with the anger. Delaney really believed that everyone else was playing by different rules, that her deceptions were justified by some greater unfairness in the world. The difference is that rich people have resources to back up their exaggerations. You were building a business plan on promises you couldn't keep and credit you didn't have. So I deserve to be destroyed. You deserve to face the consequences of your choices. Maureen sank onto the sofa next to Delaney, suddenly looking older than her 52 years. "We're going to lose the house," she said quietly. "What?" "The tax bill for the catering business, the legal fees to contest Elliot's fraud claims, the money I spent trying to help Delaney get established. We can't cover all of it. I'll have to sell the house to pay what we owe." The news hit Rhett unexpectedly hard. The house had been in their family for 15 years, purchased with her father's life insurance money and maintained through careful budgeting and occasional sacrifices. Losing it would sever the last connection to the life they'd shared before everything fell apart, but the pain was quickly replaced by a familiar cynicism. Maureen's financial crisis wasn't the result of bad luck or unexpected circumstances. It was the predictable outcome of years of enabling Delaney's irresponsible behavior. "You could contest the tax liability," Rhett said. "Prove that you weren't involved in the catering business operations. That would mean filing charges against Delaney for identity theft." "Yes, it would." Maureen looked at her younger daughter, then back at Rhett. "I can't do that." "Then you'll pay the bill." "We'll pay the bill," Maureen corrected. "This is still a family, even if you've forgotten what that means." The assumption was breathtaking in its audacity. Even now, even after everything that had happened, Maureen expected Rhett to sacrifice her financial security to clean up someone else's mess. "No," Rhett said simply. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I won't be contributing to any family bailout fund. You made your choices and I made mine." Delaney's face flushed with renewed anger. "You're just going to sit there and watch us lose everything." "I'm going to sit here and watch you face the consequences of your actions, just like I've been facing the consequences of mine. This is different. This is family. Family is supposed to protect and support each other. Family is supposed to be honest with each other. Family is supposed to respect each other's boundaries and decisions." Rhett's voice remained steady, but there was steel underneath the calm surface. "You've never treated me like family. You've treated me like a resource to be exploited when convenient and discarded when inconvenient." Maureen pressed her hands to her face. "I don't understand how we got here. I don't understand how things became so broken between us. They became broken when you decided that my value to this family was measured by my willingness to pay for everyone else's mistakes. That's not fair, isn't it? When's the last time you asked about my job, my goals, my happiness? When's the last time you offered to help me with anything? When's the last time you treated me like a daughter instead of a bailout option?" The questions echoed in the small room. Maureen and Delaney looked at each other, then at Rhett, unable to provide answers that wouldn't prove her point. "We're still family," Maureen said finally, her voice small and desperate. "Then you should have treated me like one." Rhett stood up and walked to the door, holding it open in a clear gesture of dismissal. "You can leave now." Delaney stormed past her without a word, but Maureen paused in the doorway. "If you change your mind—" "I won't. But if you do—" "I won't change my mind, Mom. I won't co-sign any more loans. I won't bail anyone out of financial problems. And I won't pretend that blood relation creates obligations that override basic respect and honesty." Maureen's eyes filled with tears. "I love you, Rhett. Despite everything, I love you." "I know you do, but love without respect isn't enough anymore." She closed the door and watched through the window as her mother and sister drove away, their headlights disappearing into the darkness. Then she made herself a cup of tea and returned to her case files, feeling something that might have been peace settling over her for the first time in years. 3 months later, Rhett stood in the community center teaching a group of 12 people how to read and understand credit reports. The free legal literacy workshop had been Miss Betty's idea, but Rhett had embraced it as a way to channel her skills into something constructive. "The most important thing to remember," she told the class, "is that you have the right to know what information is being used to make decisions about your financial life. Credit reports, loan applications, employment background checks. You can request copies of all these documents and challenge any information that's inaccurate." A woman in the front row raised her hand. "What if someone used your information without permission, like for a business or a loan you never applied for?" "That's identity theft, and it's a serious crime. You'd file a police report, contact the credit agencies to flag your accounts, and work with an attorney to protect your legal rights." The woman nodded, taking careful notes. Several other people in the class were doing the same, treating the information like the valuable resource it was. After the workshop ended, Rhett helped Miss Bet stack chairs and clean up the meeting room. The older woman moved slowly but efficiently, her arthritis making certain tasks more difficult, but not stopping her from contributing. "Good turnout tonight," Miss Bet observed. 12 people who now know how to protect themselves from financial fraud. That's not nothing. It's definitely not nothing, especially considering what some families in this town have been through lately. The reference was subtle but unmistakable. Everyone knew about the Kerrigan's situation, the house sale, Maureen's bankruptcy filing, Delaney's move to Kansas City to live with a distant cousin. The family drama had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of financial overextension and dishonesty. "Any regrets?" Miss Bet asked. About the workshop. No, I think it's valuable. About the other situation. Rhett considered the question as they turned off the lights and locked the community center. Did she regret exposing her family's financial deceptions? Did she regret the chain of events that had cost them their house and their social standing? No, she said finally. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it. Good. Regret is a luxury you can't afford when you're trying to build an honest life. They walked to their cars in comfortable silence. Rhett had been freelancing in legal compliance for 2 months now, helping small businesses navigate regulatory requirements and avoid the kinds of problems that had destroyed Delaney's boutique plans. The work was steady and well paid, and she was building a reputation for thoroughness and integrity. Nico appeared as she was unlocking her car, carrying takeout containers and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd had a productive day. Thought you might be hungry, he said, holding up the food. Chinese from that place you like. You didn't have to do that. I know I didn't have to. I wanted to. They ate in Miss Betty's garden, sitting on lawn chairs and talking about work, local politics, and plans for the spring planting season. There was no pressure in the conversation, no hidden agenda or unspoken expectations. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company, sharing a meal and comfortable silence. As the evening grew darker, they moved inside to Rhett's small living room. Nico settled onto the sofa while she made coffee, their interaction carrying the easy intimacy of people who'd known each other for years but were discovering new dimensions of compatibility. Heard the old house sold, he said when she returned with 2 mugs. Last week, Maureen got enough to pay off the debts and put a deposit on a small apartment across town. How do you feel about that? Relieved, mostly. The situation is finally resolved. No part of you wishes things had worked out differently. Rhett considered the question seriously. There had been moments over the past few months when she'd felt twinges of something that might have been guilt or sadness. Times when she remembered happy family dinners or holiday traditions that would never be repeated. But those memories belonged to a version of her family that had existed before her father's death, before financial stress and resentment had poisoned the relationships between them. I wish they had been different people, she said finally. I wish they had been capable of honesty and mutual respect. But wishing doesn't change reality. And the reality is that I tried for years to maintain relationships with people who only valued me for what I could provide. When I stopped providing it, they stopped valuing me. That tells you everything you need to know about what those relationships were actually worth. Nico reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and calloused from years of mechanical work. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Even though it destroyed my family, it didn't destroy your family. It revealed what your family had already become. They sat quietly for a while, holding hands and watching the sun set through the window. Rhett felt the deep satisfaction that came from having her life finally organized according to her own priorities rather than other people's expectations. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, then set the device aside without responding. Important? Nico asked. Delaney, asking if I want to meet for coffee next time she's in town. Are you going to? No. Just like that. Just like that. Rhett stood up and walked to the small desk where she kept her legal handbook, the same volume she'd been studying the night she decided to provide information about Delaney's loan application. She opened it to a chapter on contract law and ran her finger down the page until she found the passage she was looking for. Never sign what you haven't read, she said aloud, closing the book with a satisfied click, especially when it's family. Outside, the streetlights were coming on, illuminating a quiet neighborhood where people lived according to their means and dealt honestly with each other. It wasn't the life Red had imagined for herself 5 years ago, but it was a life built on solid foundations rather than wishful thinking. She'd learned the difference between being alone and being free. She'd learned the difference between family loyalty and family obligation. Most importantly, she'd learned that some relationships cost more than they're worth, and walking away from them wasn't cruelty, it was wisdom. The phone buzzed again with another message from Delaney, but Rhett didn't even glance at it this time. She'd read those terms and conditions carefully, and she'd decided not to sign.